So, in the early 1840s, Seguin comes back. He becomes the alcalde, the mayor of San Antonio, and he is horrified, horrified by what he is seeing. As more and more Americans, Anglo Americans, are coming into Texas, and they bring with them tremendous hostility towards Tejanos for reasons that I've talked about, and then also because of the desire for land that are owned by Tejanos. Um, he said, he wrote in a letter that the Tejanos in San Antonio felt like foreigners in their native land. And I think that this really encapsulates the tragedy of Tejanos in the post 1836 period. Because in fact, they did become foreigners in their native land. First, it was where they were born, but it's not their land anymore. It's flipped. It's gone from being the northern part of Mexico to the southern part of the United States. And one of the implications of that is that the Americans that are coming into Texas have a great desire for land to grow cotton, especially in East Texas. And they're deeply racist. Not that it's just Southerners that are deeply racist. Northerners were deeply racist too. But the point is that Seguin was right. Tejanos had become foreigners in their native land. Um, Many Tejanos realize that Seguin is friends with Sam Houston. Sam Houston has a great respect for Seguin, and they come to him and they talk about all the American outrages that are occurring. And he said, he wrote in another letter, "Can I leave them defenseless, exposed to the assaults of foreigners," talking about Americans, "who on the pretext that they, the people that are asking for his help, that they were Mexican, treated them worse than brutes?" So this is what Seguin is witnessing in the early 1840s. The Americans that are coming into Texas, when they see Tejanos, they're treating their Tejanos, and this is a direct quote from Seguin, they're treating them worse than brutes, worse than animals. As I talked about in an earlier podcast, many Tejanos are being expelled. Um, they're being expelled from East Texas, Nacogdoches. Tejanos are being expelled from Austin, and they're being forced out. They're just being forced out. There are these massive uh, schemes to take land from Tejanos, which I talked about in previous podcasts. So, from the Tejano point of view, the post 1836 revolutionary experience is an absolute nightmare. It's an absolute nightmare. And of course, the great irony of this is that at least a portion of Tejanos had supported the Texas Revolution. But they turn out to be a people without a country in many respects. Because the Americans that are coming into Texas, as I've talked about at great length, despise them for a number of reasons. But interestingly, Mexicans, people south of the Rio Grande, they also despise Tejanos as well because they see Tejanos, they never really liked Norteños. They'd always thought that Norteños were kind of, just kind of peasants, I guess you'd say, people especially in central Mexico. But after 1836, many Mexicans south of the Rio Grande viewed Tejanos as traitors to Mexico. And so the Tejanos were a people without a country. The Americans despised them, and the Mexicans despised them as well and saw them as traitors. Um, there are there's a plot to actually there's a plot to actually burn down San Antonio on the part of Americans who are trying to capture the rich land around San Antonio, the grazing land around San Antonio, and Seguin is just barely able to defeat that. Um, and in 1842, there's an expedition, an army from Mexico comes up into Mexican Texas and tries to recapture, and actually does ultimately recapture San Antonio for a very, very brief period of time. And Seguin's enemies implicate Seguin in this attempt by the Mexican army to recapture San Antonio. His American enemies start spreading rumors that Seguin had worked with the Mexican army, that Seguin was a traitor to the Republic of Texas. And because of that, uh, and Seguin is getting screwed from the Mexican side as well because the commander of this army that comes up uh, into San Antonio, he just decides to mess with Seguin, and he says that Seguin is a loyal Mexican subject. And so suddenly Seguin is in trouble. These rumors that had been foisted by Americans who hated Seguin, who wanted him out of the picture. They did not want a Tejano being the mayor of San Antonio. Uh, they gain an unwitting ally from the Mexican side, who this person, the Mexican army commander, he has no respect for Seguin. When he sees Seguin, he sees a traitor. So, long story short, Seguin is driven out of San Antonio, one step ahead of a lynch mob. Vigilantes drive him out of San Antonio. Remember, Seguin had been born in San Antonio. His family was a well established San Antonio family. He had fought in the Texas Revolution, but he ultimately is driven out of San Antonio into Mexico. And if he hadn't left San Antonio, he would have been murdered. So he goes into Mexico, and the Mexicans take one look at him, and they say, "Look, you've got two choices. You can go into our army, or you can go to jail." And Seguin is very bitter about how he'd been treated by the Texans. He doesn't want to go to jail, so he does join the Mexican army. And then the Americans who had plotted against him, they say, "Look, we were right. This guy was a traitor all along." So Seguin, he really exemplifies this idea that Tejanos are a people without a country in the post-1836 period. In 1848, Seguin wrote that he was a victim to the wickedness of a few men, that I was a foreigner in my native land. Could I be expected to endure their outrages and insults? Uh, then he said, uh, I in order to fight for the freedom of Texas, I separated from my country, parents, families, relatives, and friends, with an earnest wish to see Texas happy and free. And what happened is, and Texas does gain its independence, but Seguin is driven out of Texas. He spends the rest of his life kind of bouncing between northern Mexico and Texas. He will come back into San Antonio. And of course, we have Seguin, Texas today, a little bit east, about an hour east of the UTSA 1604 campus. Um, and what we see with Seguin, it's not really an apology for the way he was treated. It really, the fact that there's a Seguin, Texas, it shows the deep roots that the Seguin family had during the later Spanish period and the Mexican period. So Juan Seguin, this great hero of the Texas Revolution, dies, but where does he die? He dies in Nuevo Laredo. He doesn't die in Texas. He dies in 1890, and he dies not in Texas, a land that he had fought for to become free. He dies in Mexico. Very, very embittered, very angry about his treatment. An ironic and a tragic figure in Texas history, and one that I'll say once again exemplifies the very, very difficult situation that Tejanos found themselves in the post 1836 period, even Tejanos that had supported the Texas Revolution.